I'm Linda, and I've always known I wasn't the favorite child. Growing up in a house where love seemed to flow in only one direction, toward my brother David. Being 4 years younger than him somehow translated into being treated like I was invisible. While David got showered with the latest iPhones, designer clothes, and constant attention, I learned to expect the bare minimum. "David, honey, look what we got you," Mom would exclaim, presenting him with the newest gaming console or laptop. Meanwhile, I'd sit in the corner, doing my homework on my hand-me-down phone with a cracked screen. "Mom, can I get new shoes for school?" I'd ask when mine were falling apart. "Linda, we just bought David's college supplies. Maybe next month," she'd reply without even looking at me. Next month never came. But my parents were masters of deception when it came to maintaining their public image. They had perfected the art of appearing like loving, devoted parents to both their children whenever others were watching. My birthday parties were the perfect example of this facade. When I turned 12 and Mom invited all her friends and their kids, she suddenly transformed into Supermom. She bought me an expensive dress, the first new dress I'd had in years, and spent the entire evening with her arm draped around my shoulders. "Our Linda is just brilliant," she'd gush to her friends, squeezing me tight. "She gets such good grades. We're so proud of her." I'd stand there, forcing a smile, knowing that tomorrow everything would go back to normal. And it did. The next time we celebrated my birthday with just family, all I got was a mumbled "happy birthday" over breakfast. No cake, no presents, no celebration. "We're saving money this year," Dad explained when he noticed my disappointed face. "David needs new equipment for his sports activities." But everything changed the day Grandma got sick. I remember walking into her dimly lit bedroom, the heavy curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. She looked so small in her big bed, propped up against a mountain of pillows. The whole family was there: Mom, Dad, David, and me. "Margaret," Grandma said to my mother, her voice weak but determined. "I need to discuss my will with all of you." I sat quietly in the corner, watching as Grandma explained that she was leaving $300,000 to my mother. But there was a catch, a condition that made my heart skip a beat. Most of this money must go to both David and Linda's college education, Grandma insisted, her eyes moving between my parents' faces. "Promise me you'll do this." "Of course, Mom," my mother assured her, gripping her hand. "We'll make sure both Linda and David get the best education possible." "I promise." Dad nodded solemnly beside her. "You have our word." A year after Grandma's passing, David headed off to college. I watched as my parents happily paid his tuition in full, never questioning the cost. "Nothing but the best for our boy," Mom would say proudly whenever anyone asked about David's education. I spent the next 4 years focused on my studies, determined to make Grandma's last wish worth something. When I turned 18 and graduated high school with honors, I knew exactly where I wanted to go: Riverside Private College. My grades were excellent, and I'd already been accepted. I remember sitting down with my parents in our living room, acceptance letter clutched in my hand. "I got in," I announced, trying to contain my excitement. "All you need to do is pay the tuition, just like you promised Grandma." The look they exchanged made my stomach drop. "What money are you talking about, Linda?" Mom asked, her face a mask of confusion that I'd seen her wear many times before, usually right before delivering bad news. "Grandma's inheritance," I said. "The money she left specifically for our college education. For both David and me." Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Well, you see, that money's all gone now." "Gone?" My voice cracked. "What do you mean, gone?" "David just graduated," Mom explained, as if that justified everything. "He has a girlfriend now, and they're planning to move in together. He needs to get started in life. We gave him what was left of the inheritance for a down payment on his apartment," Dad added. "He needs it more than you do." The room started spinning. "You gave him my college money? The money Grandma specifically left for both of us?" "Linda, don't be dramatic," Mom said dismissively. "Your brother needs to establish himself. But what about Grandma's last wish? I could feel tears burning in my eyes. You promised her. You swore you'd use that money for both our educations. Mom's face hardened. Oh, please. Promises made to a dying old woman don't count. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're deceivers, I screamed, all the years of unfair treatment finally boiling over. You're dishonest and unfair. How could you break your oath to Grandma? That's enough. Dad stood up, his face red with anger. If you can't behave properly and respect our decisions, you can get out. You have 1 week to pack your things and leave this house. You're throwing me out because I'm asking for what Grandma wanted me to have? I stared at them in disbelief. Because I'm calling you out on breaking your promise to her? 1 week, Dad repeated firmly, while Mom sat there, arms crossed, refusing to even look at me. With shaking hands, I dialed David's number that same evening. Despite everything, some naive part of me still believed my big brother might help me. Maybe he didn't know what our parents had done. Maybe he'd do the right thing. David? My voice trembled. There's been a huge fight with Mom and Dad. They gave you all of Grandma's money, even the part that was supposed to be for my college. Yeah, I know, he replied casually, as if we were discussing the weather. You know? I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. But that money was meant for both of us. Grandma wanted us both to go to college. Could you maybe share some of it? I can't afford college without it. His laugh was cold and unfamiliar. Look, Linda, I'm not giving you anything. I need this money more than you do. I have a girlfriend, we're starting a life together. You're young, you'll figure something out. But David, this isn't fair. Half of that money was meant for me. Life isn't fair, he said flatly. I'm not sharing the money. Don't call me about this again. The line went dead, and with it, my last hope of attending the college I'd dreamed of. In that moment, I realized David was exactly like our parents, selfish, cruel, and completely indifferent to my future. I couldn't stay in that house another night. My best friend Sarah took me in when I called her in tears. Her parents were kind enough to let me stay with them until fall, treating me more like family than my own blood relatives had. I applied to State Community College and threw myself into writing scholarship essays. When the acceptance letter came with a full academic scholarship, I cried with relief. The tuition would be covered, but I still needed to figure out housing and living expenses. I found a job as a waitress at the Coffee Bean, a cafe near campus. The hours were brutal, early morning shifts before classes and late nights after studying, but it paid enough to split a tiny room with my classmate Jenny in a house near college. The next 4 years blurred together in an endless cycle of classes, work, and study sessions. While other students went to parties and enjoyed college life, I was either serving coffee or buried in textbooks. There were nights I cried myself to sleep from exhaustion, wondering if it was all worth it. But I kept going. Every time I felt like giving up, I thought about my grandmother and how she'd tried to give me this opportunity. I thought about my parents and brother, and how proving them wrong was the best revenge. I didn't speak to any of them during those 4 years. Sometimes I'd hear bits of family news through relatives. David got his apartment, my parents were bragging about his new job, but I stayed focused on my own path. When I finally graduated with honors, I did it completely on my own terms. After graduation, I landed a job at Sterling Industries, one of the top companies in our city. The CEO and owner was an older gentleman named Peter Johnson, well respected in the business community and known for running a tight but fair ship. My first week there, I met another Peter Johnson, a young marketing analyst who had the same name as our boss. He was cute, funny, and completely unrelated to our CEO. The situation led to endless confusion and jokes around the office. "Hey, did you hear Peter Johnson is looking for you?" my coworker Amy would say with a grin. "Which one?" became my standard response. "The cute one, not the one who signs our paychecks," she'd clarify with a wink. Young Peter and I started having lunch together, which turned into coffee dates, then dinner dates. He made me laugh like no one else could, and for the first time in years, I felt completely comfortable being myself around someone. 2 years flew by, and one evening, over dinner at our favorite restaurant, Peter got down on one knee. "Linda," he said, holding out a ring, "I know there are 2 Peter Johnsons in your life, but would you like to make one of them your husband?" I said yes through happy tears, and we started planning our wedding. I told a few relatives, my Aunt Susan and Cousin Rachel, about the engagement. I figured my family would find out eventually, but I didn't expect what happened next. My phone rang one Tuesday evening. When I saw Mom on the caller ID, my heart stopped. We hadn't spoken in 4 years. My first thought was that something terrible had happened. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. "Linda, darling." My mother's voice was syrupy sweet, a tone I remembered well from all those public performances of maternal love. "I just heard the wonderful news about your engagement. I'm so proud of you." I stood there in shock, listening to her gush about how happy she was for me, how much she'd missed me, how she wanted to meet my fiancé. "You and Peter must come to dinner," she insisted. "Your father and I would love to see you both. We've missed you so much, sweetheart." Something felt off. The mother who'd thrown me out of the house and hadn't contacted me in 4 years was suddenly acting like we were best friends. Her voice was dripping with the same fake sweetness she'd used at my childhood birthday parties when others were watching. Against my better judgment, I heard myself agreeing to dinner. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe some small part of me still hoped they'd changed. When I arrived at my parents' house that evening, I was surprised to see David's car in the driveway. "Linda, sweetheart." Mom rushed to hug me as if the last 4 years of silence had never happened. "But where's Peter?" "He's away on a business trip," I explained. It came up suddenly, and he couldn't reschedule. David nodded knowingly from his spot on the couch. That's how it is with successful businessmen. Always on the move, making deals. Something was definitely off. Mom had prepared an elaborate dinner, all my childhood favorites that she'd rarely bothered to make for me before. Dad kept refilling my wine glass and asking about work with unusual interest. Even David was being suspiciously nice, laughing at my jokes and asking about my life. "So, tell us more about Peter," Mom prodded, serving dessert with a smile I hadn't seen since my public birthday parties. "How did you 2 fall in love?" "You made such a wonderful choice," she continued before I could answer. "Peter Johnson is exactly what you need, darling. Who would have thought our little girl would marry one of the richest men in the city?" I nearly choked on my cake. Dad beamed proudly. "That's our smart girl, falling in love with her boss. Very strategic thinking, Linda." And suddenly everything clicked into place. The mysterious phone call, the sudden reconciliation attempt, the overly warm welcome, it all made sense. Someone, probably Aunt Susan or Cousin Rachel, had told them I was engaged to Peter Johnson. They knew the name because my boss, Peter Johnson Sr., was one of the city's most prominent businessmen. They'd put 2 and 2 together and gotten 5. They thought I was marrying my wealthy CEO, not the marketing analyst who shared his name. I opened my mouth to correct them, but then I remembered all those years of neglect, the broken promise to Grandma, the way they'd thrown me out and stolen my college money. A wicked idea took root in my mind. "Yes," I said smoothly, watching their eager faces. "Peter is an amazing man. So successful, so generous." They lapped it up like hungry cats with cream. Every time they made assumptions about my wealthy fiancé, I just smiled and nodded. When they talked about his business empire, I didn't correct them. When they gushed about his mansion in the hills, which I knew existed because the CEO's house was featured in a local magazine, I just sipped my wine and let them believe. Mom hung on my every word, Dad couldn't stop bragging about his successful daughter, and even David looked at me with new respect in his eyes. They'd finally decided to love me, but only because they thought I was marrying into money. As the evening wound down, I noticed my parents exchanging meaningful glances. Dad cleared his throat and started fidgeting with his napkin, a tell I remembered from childhood when he wanted something. "Linda, sweetie," he began, his voice carefully casual. Since we're family again, I think we should be honest with each other about everything. Mom reached for his hand, putting on her best worried expression. We've been having some difficulties lately. You see, Dad continued, we tried to help David with his business venture. Took out a loan against the house to get him started. David stared at his plate, suddenly very interested in the remnants of his dessert. But the business, well, it didn't quite work out, Dad sighed heavily. We're in debt now, up to our ears. The bank is threatening foreclosure. It's been really tough, David chimed in, giving me what he probably thought was a meaningful look. We're all struggling. But now that you're marrying Peter, well, a man in his position probably wouldn't want his in-laws living on the street, right? I nearly burst out laughing right there. The irony was almost too perfect. They'd stolen my college money to help David, and now they were drowning in debt because of him. I had to bite my cheek to keep a straight face. I'll have to think about it, I managed to say calmly. These things need to be discussed with Peter, of course. When I got home that night, I called my Peter, who was in Chicago for a marketing conference. You won't believe what happened, I said, finally letting myself laugh. They think I'm marrying the other Peter Johnson. Wait, they think you're marrying the boss? Peter started laughing too. The 65-year-old CEO? Yes. And they suddenly want to be one big happy family again because they think I'm marrying a millionaire. We spent an hour laughing about it, planning to tell them the truth at the next family dinner. But the next morning, my phone rang. Linda, darling, my mother's syrupy voice came through the speaker. I hope you've had time to think about our situation. We really need help with the mortgage payment this month. Something snapped inside me. 4 years of silence, and now this? They couldn't even wait a day before asking for money? Actually, Mom, I have thought about it, I said coolly. I'll help you, but I have one condition. Anything, sweetheart. I want you to post on all your social media accounts exactly why we haven't spoken for 4 years. Tell everyone how you kicked me out, how you broke your promise to Grandma about my college money, how you gave everything to David. Tell the whole truth. There was a long silence on the other end. But that's private family business, she stammered. Take it or leave it, Mom. That's my condition. I could practically hear her weighing her options, her pride versus her desperate need for money. Finally, she spoke. Fine, she said tightly. I'll do it. But you'll help us after that, right? Of course, Mom, I said sweetly, using the same fake tone she'd always used with me. Family comes first. A few days after my conversation with Mom, the notification popped up on my phone. There it was, a long post from my mother on Facebook, complete with an old family photo of us all smiling at some long-ago holiday gathering. To all our friends and family, the post began. I need to make a public apology to my daughter, Linda. 4 years ago, we made a terrible mistake when we kicked her out of our home. We haven't spoken since then, and the fault lies entirely with us. I read on, my hands shaking slightly. When my mother was dying, she left money specifically for both my children's college education. We broke our oath to her. We gave all the money to our son David and left Linda with nothing. We forced her to find her own way, to work through college while studying, and we didn't even try to help her. I'm seeking reconciliation with my daughter because I love her and realize my mistakes. I hope she can forgive us. The comments started rolling in immediately. Margaret, I can't believe you would do this to your own daughter. How could you break a promise to your dying mother? Poor Linda. No wonder we haven't seen her at family gatherings. I always wondered why she wasn't at Christmas dinner anymore. My phone rang the next morning. Mom's number flashed on the screen. Linda, she said briskly, all pretense of warmth gone. I did what you asked. When will you transfer the money? I couldn't hold back my laughter. Oh, Mom, there isn't going to be any money. What? You see, there's been a funny misunderstanding. I'm not marrying the CEO Peter Johnson. I'm marrying Peter Johnson, the senior marketing manager. They just happen to have the same name. Isn't that hilarious? The silence on the other end was deafening. You, she sputtered. You tricked us. You've ruined our reputation. Everyone is talking about us. How dare you humiliate us like this? Karma's funny that way, isn't it? I said calmly. You ungrateful little. I hung up before she could finish. David called next, his voice shaking with rage. You manipulative liar, he shouted. How could you do this to us? Mom and Dad are devastated. Everyone's talking about them. That's rich, coming from you, I cut in. You want to talk about lying and manipulation? How about stealing your sister's college money? How about watching your parents kick me out and doing nothing? You have no right to lecture me about honesty or justice, David. Goodbye. I hung up on him too, feeling lighter than I had in years. The truth was finally out there, and no amount of their usual manipulations could hide it anymore. A week after the social media storm, my assistant Jenny poked her head into my office. Linda, Mr. Johnson wants to see you in his office. Right away. My stomach dropped. When I walked into the CEO's office, I found him holding a piece of paper, his expression unreadable. Linda, please sit down, he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. I received an interesting phone call from your mother this morning. She claims you've been using my name to extort money from your family. Says you've been damaging my reputation by pretending to be engaged to me. I felt the blood drain from my face. Mr. Johnson, I can explain everything. Please do, he said, leaning back in his chair. I'm quite curious about how I apparently became engaged without knowing it. So I told him everything, about my grandmother's inheritance, about being kicked out, about working my way through community college. I explained about the name confusion with young Peter, and how my family had jumped to their own conclusions. By the end, I was fighting back tears. I know I should have corrected their assumption immediately, I finished. I let my hurt and anger get the better of me. I understand if you need to let me go. To my surprise, Mr. Johnson started laughing, not a polite chuckle, but deep, genuine laughter that made his whole body shake. Let you go, he wiped his eyes. My dear, you've given me the best laugh I've had in years. He stood up and walked to his office window, still chuckling. You know, when I made my first million, suddenly cousins I hadn't seen in 30 years were calling me, asking for loans. My nephew, hadn't spoken to me since he was a teenager, wanted me to fund his ridiculous startup idea. Family can be incredibly opportunistic when money's involved. He turned back to me, his eyes twinkling. What you did was brilliant. A bit mischievous, perhaps, but they deserved it. You made them publicly admit their wrongdoing before they could get their hands on what they thought was easy money. That's exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need in this company. I sat there, stunned. So, I'm not fired? Fired? I'm promoting you. We need more people who can think on their feet like that. He paused, grinning. Though perhaps we should give you a different supervisor than young Peter, now that you're getting married. Speaking of which. He walked back to his desk and sat down. After all this confusion, I feel like I'm practically part of your family drama now. Any chance I could get an invitation to the Real Peter Johnson wedding? I laughed, relief flooding through me. We'd be honored to have you there, sir. 2 months later, I stood in my wedding dress, watching both Peter Johnsons chatting amiably at the reception. The CEO had given us a generous gift, an all-expenses-paid luxury honeymoon to the Maldives, and had just finished delivering a touching and hilarious toast about namesakes and mistaken identities that had the whole room roaring with laughter. Through the grapevine of family gossip, I've heard about what happened to my parents and David. The bank foreclosed on their house. Turned out David's failed business venture had put them deeper in debt than anyone knew. They're living in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment now, barely making ends meet. They tried to move in with David. After all, they'd given him my college money for his house down payment. But my brother, true to form, turned them away. I have my own family to think about, he told them. you'll just get in the way. Sometimes I think about karma. About how my parents' greed and favoritism eventually cost them everything, their house, their reputation, and both their children. About how David's selfishness left him with a nice house, but no family willing to speak to him anymore. As for me, I have a wonderful husband, a fulfilling career, and a boss who turned out to be more supportive than my own family ever was. I learned that sometimes the family you choose, friends like Sarah who took me in when I had nowhere to go, colleagues who become mentors, people who stand by you when things get tough, they're more valuable than the family you're born into.